All right, and with that, Mike,
Okay, well, thank you.
and just to just swipe this way to go through the slides on the screen.
Oh, I'll get it. I'll figure it out. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. My name, thank you. My name is Michael Thomas, and I was one of the founders of GVT Rail System. And I live, actually, it's kind of an unusual circumstance. I live here in New England. I actually live in Hollis, New Hampshire. So even though the railroads are in New York and Pennsylvania, I had moved out here in the early 80s to take a job in Nashua at Sanders, and worked there for many years while we were getting the railroads off the ground. So this talk is I've given it before. It'll break out kind of the railroads, how we started, some of the cool stuff that we did early on, and then the second, or the ending third of the talk is about kind of some of the cool things we've done and the opportunities we've had from a historical society perspective, as well as just a fun railroad perspective. So let's see if this works. Right there? No?
Just swipe side.
That way? Up?
On the slide.
Got a heavy hand.
Just go like this, like an iPad.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So a quick background on the railroads. We've been in business. I'm going to step in front of the podium here. We've been in business for 4 decades, almost 40 years. It was 5 people that had a passion for the railroad business, but we also understood the business side of things too. And it was an opportune moment in the railroad business. Conrail was spinning off some of the railroads, and we saw there was some value in secondhand Alco locomotives. So right now our network is 318 miles, 3 divisions in 2 states. The DL&W Falls Road, Mohawk, Adirondack, and Northern, the Penn Division. We'll probably do 20,000, maybe a little better this year, depending on how the economy holds up, between 22 and 25,000 freight cars on that 318 miles of railroad. So one of the things that really has helped the railroad, and if I start to trail off and you can't hear me, let me know. I'll speak up. Usually I can speak pretty loudly. But our size railroad has a lot of unique opportunities. So we can go out, we can deal with the politicians, the local people, and we can deal with the businesses to try to bring them back to rail. You know, we have a very good marketing team, and we have a very good political team that allows us to work with the cities, towns, and counties, and also with the, like I said, with the businesses and the industrial development agencies in our areas. Current 4-year streaks of no reportable injuries in the Mohawk and Penn divisions. So we want to take care of our people too. So while we're in business to make money and make a profit, we're not doing it at the expense of our people. We want to make sure our people are safe, and we run a safe and efficient railroad. So okay, whoop, this way. Here we go. So there are really 5 railroads in the core system. The Depew, Lancaster, and Western, which was our first railroad in Buffalo. Mohawk, Adirondack, and Northern, up north of Utica, New York. The Delaware-Lackawanna in Scranton, which many of you are familiar with. The Falls Road, which is an old New York Central line. And then the Lowville and Beaver River, which is also up in central New York. So, the way the company started is kind of an interesting start. Myself and a couple other people got together, and we wanted to save. Conrail was scrapping hundreds of locomotives in Altoona. There were just deadlines miles long of pre-Conrail, predecessor railroad locomotives that were being scrapped. We went to Altoona, and the 5497, which was the Lehigh Valley 211, was in the scrap line. It was operable. Conrail was ready to start cutting these things, and we asked them if they would sell it to us. We were planning on buying it, donating it to a museum to save it, and taking the tax write-off for the cost of the locomotive. And we were willing to do that. We were all doing pretty well. I wasn't married, didn't have children, so that helped. But
Child.
yeah, that's right. So we brought the locomotive to Rochester, and the Rochester and Southern had just started operations on an ex-B&O line that went from Salamanca up to Rochester, and they were in need of motive power. And they pushed a button, it ran, it could haul freight. And oh, by the way, I'll add this picture here is as its original Alco power. When we bought it, it was a DeWitt Jeep. They had Conrail had put a 12-cylinder 567 in it. Yeah, so I left that out. But anyway, so they were a pretty good locomotive, those DeWitt Jeeps. You know, with the GE electrical gear in them, they hauled pretty well and they were very reliable. So Rochester and Southern took it off our hands. Oops. And we leased it to them for 2 years. After 2 years of making money back on the locomotive, we finally donated it to the museum. But the core group that had put the money in the pot to buy the locomotive realized that, hey, there might be opportunities out there if we could raise some additional capital to buy a few locomotives and try to make some money leasing them. So we identified a number of RS-11s that were still running in New England as possible candidates. So the Grand Trunk at the time was using a couple Central Vermont RS-11s, the 3600 and 3604. In 1988, I went up to, on the left, that's in Portland, and on the right, that is, I don't know where that is on the right. It was on, but I can tell you it was on the South Paris switcher, because I had to try to find it up around South Paris that day.
Oh, by the way, could you step back?
Oh, I'm sorry, sure, yeah.
There we go, yeah.
Actually, yeah. So, yeah, I just have to figure out how to swipe here. So, brought both locomotives, brought them to Rochester again. Rochester and Southern immediately took one of them. The other one needed a little bit of work, and George Hockaday and myself did a lot of work to get that locomotive running. At this point, I was living in Nashua, and I would drive to Western New York on Friday nights or Friday afternoons, work on the locomotives on the weekend, and drive back Monday and come back to my regular job. So we also bought the 3603, which was in fairly good shape, but it had a bad power assembly. We wound up using that as a parts locomotive. So, oh, God, I'm going to get this right one of these days. So here's a picture. When we purchased them, they were, like I said, they were working on the Grand Trunk. They brought them to St. Albans, and we did a final inspection on them at St. Albans, and this is in the roundhouse at St. Albans just before they were ready to move to Rochester. Interestingly enough, we purchased the locomotives from the Grand Trunk Western. When I cut the check to pay for the engines, they were owned officially by the Grand Trunk Western. So even though they were DW&P and then Central Vermont, the Grand Trunk Western owned the locomotives. They had the title to them. So we have these two locomotives in Rochester. One's leased, the other one we're preparing for lease. And all of a sudden, Guilford ceased operations of the D&H. Right, so the Delaware and Hudson is shut down overnight. Guilford pulls all their equipment out off the D&H, and the D&H dies. Right, so shortly thereafter, after a number of meetings, the Susquehanna was named designated operator of the railroad, and they only had a very small fleet of locomotives. They didn't have what was needed to operate the whole Delaware and Hudson system. And they had a hard time finding other locomotives because there were other railroads that wanted pieces of the D&H, big class ones, but when the Susquehanna got the whole system, the class ones were reluctant to help them with additional power. So we got our 36, oh, now what did I do? Here we go. Okay, so 3604 stays in Rochester, 3600 goes to Binghamton. And at that time we had changed the C to a G on the locomotives and started running it and was helping the D&H solve some of their motive power problems. A couple more pictures of that engine in Binghamton. And in fact, at some point, the D&H used this locomotive as a pusher on Belden Hill. I have a video of it working with a Norfolk Southern U-boat or Norfolk and Western U-boat shoving trains up Belden Hill. So it was quite here we are, a bunch of guys that are just trying to, at least a couple locomotives, and all of a sudden Walter Rich is knocking on our door for anything we have. So, so this is the 3604. This isn't a very good photo, but this is on the Rochester and Southern. It's the old B&O station, or the old B&O offices in Rochester, New York. So now we have 2 locomotives, and we have them leased, and we're kind of getting working our way into the railroad business. Erie County, which is the county which Buffalo is located in, had purchased a piece of the Delaware-Lackawanna and Western Main Line in Depew and Lancaster, New York. And Conrail wanted out of it, but the county realized that if the railroad had been torn up, there was a large industrial center there. If the railroad had been torn up, that there would be no opportunity for industrial development. And it was an old dresser plant and a number of different companies. So Erie County bought it from Conrail, and they decided to put out an RFP for somebody to operate the railroad. So we wrote a proposal. A number of other railroads were kind of interested. There wasn't a whole lot of traffic on this line, but Erie County granted us the proposal. The photo here is our kind of executive team. I'm not there, unfortunately, but this was the first day of operation on the railroad. So, I'll get this right. So that was the new DL&W, the Depew, Lancaster, and Western. And you can see it runs here from Cheektowaga to Lancaster, part of our system. Later that year, we purchased another locomotive, which was the 4085. It was on the Ontario Central. They were looking to sell it. It was obviously an ex-D&H RS3, and we figured that if we could afford it, the money that we'd made, bought this one, hopefully use it either on the railroad we had just won and lease the other 2, or it would just give us an opportunity for some growth. And this is the 4085. When we started that operation, there was some state money to help rebuild the line. And so these are ballast cars. We dumped about 70 or 80 cars of ballast on that railroad to help bring it up to better track conditions. And we used the 4085 for those ballast trains. At the time, we were also doing some work. We had taken over switching at Burroughs Lot in Buffalo, which was a big ConAgra grain facility. But we were also looking at a railroad up in northern New York called the Lowville and Beaver River. And the Lowville and Beaver River was a pre-stagger short line that was owned by the paper mill that it served. It ran 2 44-tonners, and it was all 60-pound stick rail. Yeah, so we were concerned if we built business on that line that the 44-tonners wouldn't be able to handle the traffic that was coming in. So we went to CN and we bought an MR14. And a lot of people don't know this engine was on our property. I'm sorry that we sent it back, but we brought it to Buffalo, and it turns out it had a main bearing leak, not a main bearing failure, but a main bearing leak. And after kind of inspecting it and looking at what capabilities we had, we wound up sending it back to CN, and they wound up repaying our money. It's a shame because I love those engines. I saw those up in New Brunswick, spent a lot of time in New Brunswick and in the Maritimes on some of the smaller branch lines with those MR14s. They were RS18s that were retrucked with an A1A truck for specifically for light rail service up in the Maritimes. And I'm really, one or two are saved. I think a number of them, 5 or 6 of them went to Cuba for use in sugarcane fields in Cuba. And there are 2, maybe 1 preserved up in New Brunswick. But that's one of the saddest ones I let get away. So anyway, Conrail is also looking to sublease contract switching at the Conagra flour mill in Buffalo. The DL&W is in place and operating. This flour mill required 16 hours a day service, 6 days a week. And it was weird. It was 8 hours on and then off for 4 hours and then another 8 hours at night. So Conrail came to us. They said, we kind of like what you're doing in Buffalo. Would you be interested in switching this yard for us? It's a former Pennsylvania Burroughs lot yard. And Conrail was pleased, like I said, with what we were doing in Depew, and they considered us for this operation. And this is a picture at Conagra. So we knew this may be coming down the pike, and we had our 3604 and 3600 set up to run over at Conagra. We used the 4085 on the Depew, Lancaster, and Western. And we switched quite a few cars here. It was mostly grain coming in that was being milled. Some of it was barley for Genesee Brewery, so we were bringing in material that was getting milled. They had a malt house there too, so it was malt, and they would drive that over to Genesee Brewery. So this was kind of the second operation, helped us grow a little bit. We wound up later giving that up. Another railroad took it over. Unfortunately, today Conagra is no longer at Burroughs Lot, and I think the yard is still there, but it's either used to store cars or it's being slowly ripped up. So next down the pike was the Lowville and Beaver River. And the L&BR ran from Lowville, New York to Croghan, New York. Again, you could tell by the color of the 44 tonner there that it was owned by a paper mill. It was, I'm trying to think of the paper mill that whose colors were white and green like that. I can't think of it off the top of my head. International Paper. It was IP, yeah, yeah, IP. Ooh, thank you. Very good. And it was kind of our first real longer railroad. We bought a few CN cars to use down there for tourist trains and passenger trains. This was one of the early trains running on the Lowville and Beaver River. Those were great cars. But unfortunately on the Lowville, as happens with a lot of passenger trains, unless you have a tourist influx or amount of people turning over, everybody wants to ride the first train. But after they've ridden it once, it's like, okay, nobody wants to ride it again. So we stopped that operation. But we did serve the Beaver Falls paper mill. And it was Boise Cascade, not IP. I have it here. 244 tonners, raw material into the mill, and then we had some feed we'd bring into Croghan. That section of New York is a very, very has a very heavy agrarian economy. And in fact, they produce a lot of milk. There's a lot of cows in that area. Kraft has a huge cream cheese plant in Lowville. And in fact, most of the cream cheese that you eat, that comes in, it's in the New England area, all comes out of Lowville, New York. So we were bringing feed in for the cows to produce milk. And we were trying to get Kraft to ship cream cheese out, and they had done so early under Conrail, and they were happy doing it, but Conrail had managed to kind of scare them away from the railroad. They set up a whole logistics system, and they didn't want to come back to operating the railroad, to using rail again. Some of you, Philadelphia cream cheese is not from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's named for Philadelphia, New York, which is yeah. So it's actually Philadelphia cream cheese is named after Philadelphia, New York, which is up on the Montreal Secondary. Yeah. So
Maybe we'll buy it.
yeah. So like I said, paper mill was going well. They were making some very special paper. We were bringing feed into Croghan. And we had, in the Lowville and Beaver River engine house, we had a Shea locomotive which was being rebuilt. It was owned by a private individual in that area. And we would use that Shea along with along with the 44 tonners for the excursions. And I'll step in front here just a second. The Lowville and Beaver River is here. So here's Utica, here's Lowville, and here's Croghan. And Croghan is the town where that was the end of the line. So, okay, I got it right that time. So this is a picture in the paper mill there with the 44 tonner switching. We're bringing latex in these tank cars for the coated paper and other raw materials for paper production there. Again, we had a great time. This was a special excursion we ran from out of Canada. We had a bunch of Canadian rail fans come down, bus down, hired the train for a day to ride with the 44 tonner in the Shay. And this is a picture of the Shay. Yeah, the Shay is still there actually, and it's operable. The couple of gentlemen there, the tall one is Rob Mangles. Some of you may know Rob. Rob worked for us for a while, but he is a Amtrak passenger car inspector. He lives in the Minneapolis area. He's been he's done a lot of passenger car rebuilds for cars that are Amtrak certified. So Lehigh Valley 353, which is now at Steamtown, was one of his projects. He rebuilt the whole thing. But they took this Shay, they stripped it all down, and they ran it, and it was quite a locomotive. It's still owned by RISNY, which is the Railroad Enthusiasts of Northern New York, and it's operable, but they're just trying to find a reason to operate it. So the paper mill was sold and closed, and the LBR as a pre-staggered railroad remained. It's inactive now. Right now there's a person using it to ride rail bikes, but because it's a pre-staggers railroad, we still use the reporting marks. And you can see cars running around the U.S. with LBR markings. So if you see a car you'll see a lot of scrap hoppers with LBR markings. Those are actually Lowville and Beaver River. So,
isn't there a current dispute with the county over the line?
No, there's no dispute.
Something just was settled.
We're selling it to the county.
Is it being sold?
Yeah, so it's being sold to the county. Yep. This is Carthage. So buying the Lowville and Beaver River did for us was it kind of got us an in with the rest of the railroads out of Carthage, New York, and including the Lowville Industrial Track, which ran from Carthage down to Lowville, and the Newton Falls line, which ran from Carthage up to Newton Falls. Newton Falls had a large iron ore mine, and during Conrail days, it was owned by Jones and Laughlin Steel. They used to run unit trains of iron ore out of there to both Pittsburgh and Cleveland. So back in the early 80s, mid 80s, there were 70 or 80 car unit trains that came out of Benson Mines with iron ore going to either Pittsburgh or Cleveland. The mine was closed. However, there's a lot of rock and a lot of other materials up there, and we are seeing a lot of interest right now. This is in bringing rock out of that mine. This is in Carthage with one of our C425s meeting with the Conrail local there with some B237s. So let's talk about the Mohawk, Adirondack, and Northern. When we bought it from Conrail, there was the Carthage cluster, which was Carthage to Lowville, and Carthage to Newton Falls, ex New York Central we were talking about. Lowville Industrial Track, Carthage to Lowville. And there were some small businesses on there. It also included the Lyons Falls branch. It came out of Utica Yard and up to Lyons Falls. There was a large paper mill at Lyons Falls at the time, since closed. We had one time, when we took over these railroads in the early 90s, there were 7 paper mills operating in Lewis and in Lewis County and in, no, not Jefferson. Jefferson was Carthage. Lewis and the other one, I'll come to it.
Monroe?
No, but 7 paper mills, and there are none left. The New York State chased a lot of them away. Yeah. So anyway, so the Lyons Falls branch, we have a number of customers there. The Rome Industrial Track, so we have there's a series of operations in Rome, some fairly large customers in Rome, New York. That included the Rome Air Force Base at one time. We used to bring coal into Rome Air Force Base. It's been switched over to natural gas. But to get to the Rome industrial track, we would go from Utica for, I think it's like 16 miles over the water level. So our C425s actually run on the CSX Conrail water level main line. And then that also included the Batavia industrial track, which was a series of tracks around Batavia, New York. And to give you some idea, again, this is the Batavia industrial track here, and then this is the Newton Falls line up to Newton Falls. There are places where it's 6 miles from the nearest road up there. This was the Lowville industrial track down to Lowville. This was the Lyons Falls branch, and we have business in Boonville up to Lyons Falls, Remsen, and that's where the Adirondack Railroad comes off, is in Remsen, and runs up into the Adirondacks. Utica is here. We run over Conrail or CSX to Rome, where we have 2 pieces of track in Rome. And in fact, one of the sections of track in Rome is a piece of the New York, Ontario, and Western as well. So we actually operate over a small piece of the NYO&W, which is actually kind of a problem because it's NYO&W rail. And, so they were different than all the other, we have 105-pound Dudley, New York Central Rail, we have, but trying to find replacement joint bars and rail for what was O&W rail was torn up in the 60s can be trouble. So again, on the M8N, it's kind of 4 railroads in one. Newton Falls Division, Newton Falls Pulp and Paper. When we bought the railroad, Newton Falls Pulp and Paper was a big customer up on the end of the line, which has since shut down. Benson Mines, Lowville Industrial Track, Lyons Falls Division, and then the Rome Industrial Track. And we still have Rome is still a very active place. We have a lot of business in Rome. So just a couple pictures of up and around there. When we took over the railroad, the winters up in that section of New York, in Carthage and Watertown and those areas are legendary. Tug Hill getting 20 or 30 inches of snow. So the first thing we did was we built an engine house in Carthage that would allow us at least a place to keep the engines and get the ice and snow off the running gears. Down below is Utica, and you can see one of our locomotives switching in Utica Yard. This is one of the Utica running tracks. One of the things we're very proud of is that we put a lot of money back into the railroad. So you can see the these 2 running tracks are in excellent shape. And this is some of the plastic pellet business that we have in Utica and some of the car storage, and also some other materials, some other butane and propane that we bring in there as well. Also, the photo on the right was taken on the New York Central water level. We do track speed, 60 miles an hour, and that's us crossing, meeting Amtrak, and there's a CSX coil steel car there going to a customer, and so our guys they're qualified on the water level.
Which engine house was that?
This is Carthage Engine House.
By the way, Copenhagen, New York in March had 305 inches of snow.
Yeah, not far.
305.
Yeah.
That's
In 1 month,
Yeah, it's not far from there.
25 feet.
Delaware-Lackawanna. This is kind of the crown jewel. So the DL is the former Erie-Lackawanna from Scranton to Portland, PA, with some assorted branch lines that were the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley and the Erie. And it's also a piece of the Delaware and Hudson from Scranton to Carbondale, which was the D&H main line, which Guilford ran for many years, the Penn Division. Picture of the inside of our Von Storch shop, which we built it was during COVID, so maybe about 5 years ago. We saw we had a very small shop. It was difficult to work in. We needed a place that would allow us to do heavy repairs for our fleet all around New York as well, and built this shop there to do that. 30-ton overhead crane, elevated pits so guys can do inspections. And this is a picture of our business car there. And then on the right is a photo in Portland. For many years when we started the railroad, we did our interchange at Taylor Yard. When Conrail sold that off, we started doing interchange with NS in Portland. Now that's with the advent of the Portage Bridge being rebuilt. We're now doing all of our interchange at Taylor Yard again with NS. And part of that was because the old bridge at Portageville was not good. It was only a 263 bridge. It wasn't good for 286. So a lot of the traffic we haul is grain to a grain mill up in Mount Pocono, and none of those 286 cars could go over that bridge, so they had to be routed around the southern tier. This is a map of the Delaware-Lackawanna. You can see from Portland to Scranton, and then there's some different industrial tracks in and around Scranton shown in that inset. We actually run on a piece of the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley, or a piece of the Erie, Dunmore branch here, and there's actually a trolley that operates there as well. You didn't touch it. And so the track in and around Scranton is a little bit complicated. There are so many railroads going to so many anthracite breakers at one time that there's tracks everywhere in that town. The Von Storch shops are up by the old D&H Greenridge Yard, and the reason we built them there was because there was some land which was the property of the D&H. It was the D&H Greenridge engine house and yard at one time, long gone. Von Storch, in case you're wondering how it got that name, it was built on the site of the Von Storch breaker. So there was a huge coal breaker that's right across the street from where the shops were built. And so that coal breaker was the Von Storch breaker. It's now I think it's a Walmart now. And so that's how it got. We're kind of, it's an homage to the breakers that were around northeast Pennsylvania at that time.
So that all that red in the map in Scranton is actually your trackie?
Yes. And in fact,
Is that the old Susquehanna Connecting?
Susquehanna Connecting is owned by Luzerne County.
Oh.
We don't have a piece of that. But one of the things we do have, I failed to mention, and I should, is that on this trackage here, to get up to a customer, we are actually use a switchback, believe it or not. So we still have a switchback on that railroad to get up to a polymer customer. We bring plastic pellets in there, and to get it there, we have to go on a switchback on the old Erie. It goes from the Lackawanna Wyoming Valley to the Erie, and then up another Lackawanna Wyoming Valley branch. So we actually, and the ruling grade is like 3.2%. I mean, it's really tough grade. One locomotive is good for 2 or 3 cars up there. So, so there aren't a whole lot of, I mean, there's a switchback. There was a switchback on the M&B, right, on Montpelier and Barry. And that's just about the only operating switchback that I know of in the Northeast. So, of course, on the Delaware-Lackawanna, it was the Lackawanna main line, right? So we have significant ruling grades on the east and west slope of the Poconos. I think, off the top of my head, I think the west slope is 1.6% for like 14 miles or 15 miles. And the east slope is 1.8%. So it's a tougher climb, but it's a little shorter. It's like 12 miles. We have the Carbondale line as well, which is, of course, is a former line over Ararat on the D&H used. And then I talked about the switchback. I did that again. And then there's also we also go through what was the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley Tunnel. And we share that with the trolley operation as well. So we haul the cars that are going into the switchback, go through that tunnel and out the other side. There were a lot of stories from I know a lot of people that were Erie Lackawanna men, and even a few left Lackawanna and Erie people. And the stories they tell about going through that tunnel. So the tunnel was completely relined and rebuilt with some Pennsylvania state money, more for tourism money for the trolley. but there are some stories from the Erie and the Lackawanna and the Erie-Lackawanna men about going through that tunnel and having broken sewer lines above the tunnel and just having sewage flow into the tunnel and land on the locomotives. And nobody wanted that job, you know. So, but those are in days past. So here we go. Like I said, multiple freight customers. We run heavy mainline trains, 10,000 ton trains of wheat and grain, lumber going up into the Poconos. Typically 3 6-axles and a 4-axle, or 4 6-axles. And since we took over that railroad, we've increased the freight by about a factor of 25. Wow. So it's a pretty good story. Of course, we deal with Steamtown. That has its challenges. It's great, but also has its challenges sometimes. And then we also have the Trolley Museum as well, Lackawanna County Trolley. So, as I mentioned, heavy operation requires 6-axle power. It's a picture of one of our locomotives with a truck out. You can see it's not hanging in the air, but it's resting on the pilot there. So I could say, you know, there's the joke that, yeah, it's a bad neighborhood. Somebody stole the wheels off it, you know. But you've probably heard that a million times. So actually, Von Storch is not a bad neighborhood at all, actually. We're very happy to be there. So, and then this is a picture from back in the early 90s with an excursion we ran with. It was right after the grand opening of Steamtown, when the Syracuse chapter had brought down their 2 E8s that were ex-Penzi that they had relettered Lackawanna. Those, I think, wound up on the operation in Corinth, Ed Ellis's operation, Saratoga and North Creek. And they've since, they were just recently moved from the Saratoga and North Creek to be scrapped out in Ohio. So, yeah, it's sad. And then this is kind of our typical power for the grain trains and trains going up the mountain. So in the front is a M636 that we purchased from CP, and another M636, and then the C636, and then the GE 630 that we bought. So
in the previous picture, by the way, could I interject a question?
Yeah.
Where was that? It's a single track line.
yes, it wasn't. Well, it's double track. The Erie-Lackawanna main line was double track.
Oh,
Okay, and when they sold this railroad to the Lackawanna County Rail Authority, Conrail held track 2. They kept track 2.
Oh, that's
And
right.
so they went.
It's the Lackawanna main line.
Right, this is the Lackawanna main.
Okay, sorry, I hadn't recognized.
Yep, and this is in Elmhurst.
Oh,
So
yeah, I know.
it's going
Thank you.
westbound at Elmhurst. I don't think this photo is available anymore. I think the trees and the shrubs have grown up to the point where you can't get this angle anymore. But that's just the eastern tip of Elmhurst Reservoir there. So, but yeah, so we wound up having, so Conrail scrapped track 2, and we wound up working with the scrapper to haul it out of there. We wound up with about 6 or 7 miles of welded rail as part of that, though, as part of our deal. So yeah, and we've been slowly putting that into the Pocono main. So we're using it to replace curve-worn rail. Again, the railroad was in terrible, I won't say terrible shape, a lot of really curve-worn rail from the Erie-Lackawanna days, and so we've been replacing a lot of that curve-worn rail. This is, yeah.
That third locomotive is the C636. That's the one from Stockton, California.
That's correct. Yes,
Blue.
and I'll get to that a little further in the talk. So, Delta Bulk Terminal. Yep. But like I said, this is from Bridge 60. This is from the foot of Bridge 60 Tower, and kind of like I said, our usual power that go out for the day. A couple other photos that are kind of neat. Back in the Rail Freight Seminar, Pennsylvania Rail Freight Seminar was in Scranton in 1994, I believe, and CP ran their executive train down. We took the guests with a CP SD40 and one of our C425s up to a resort at Mount Pocono for a golf outing. I actually played with the president of the Canadian Pacific, and on the 18th hole, I said, you know, I'll make you a deal. I said, if you win the hole, you can keep my locomotive and take it back to Binghamton, and if I win the hole, I'm going to keep your SD40. Would you do that? And he said, I don't think the shareholders would be very happy if we entered that wager. So, but the next day we ran up to Binghamton, and this is with our shared locomotives. And this is actually a picture taken from the fireman's seat of an SD40 stopped on Tunkhannock Viaduct. So you can see the paraffins here on the side. And we actually stopped the train on Tunkhannock Viaduct. People who had the ability to got out, were able to walk and take pictures off the viaduct. So personally, I stayed in the locomotive cab. I was very happy to not go down and walk on the right of way. But yeah, so this is actually on Tunkhannock, and those are the paraffins on the side. So. Again, another photo in Scranton. Those two BC Erie-Lackawanna C425s were the original power that we bought when we started the railroad. We also had a U30B and the Delaware and Hudson 5019 down there, and we had purchased 4 C425s from BC Rail. For the operations on the Mohawk, and when we were awarded the operation in Scranton, we bought 2 more, and we're bringing them to Pennsylvania. And the day after we cut the check and closed the deal, BC Rail went on strike, and so the locomotives were stuck in North Vancouver for about 60 days. While the BC Rail was on strike, we couldn't get them east, so we wound up having to lease power from Mike Kelly, who owned the 5019, and John Nolan, who owned it's an old Ontario and Western. It was a U30B, but it was painted for the Ontario and Western. You may have seen pictures of it many years ago. Yep. And but then when our engines came, we painted them kind of in a quasi Erie-Lackawanna scheme, and just so you know. We expect to repaint those 2 locomotives this summer. It's on the schedule once the PA is finished. And we're going to do what would be considered a more authentic Erie-Lackawanna scheme back to the original Erie-Lackawanna paint. So, Falls Road. So the last railroad we bought was the Falls Road Railroad. We purchased it from Conrail in '96. And that operates from Lockport to Brockport, New York, along the Erie Canal. So it was the former through route. And let me just here's the main line here, the water level. In Rochester, the Falls Road came off and went across on the Canadian Southern to Detroit. So it was a quick way to get from the Detroit area to New York City. Bypass Buffalo, bypass Cleveland, bypass Toledo, bypass all those bottlenecks.
Heavy fast freights even in the late 1960s.
Yeah, well, even into when I was in college in Western New York in '82, there was still an ML 304 and 303, which were 2 auto rack trains that came across the Canadian Southern, came across Niagara, came over the Niagara River in Niagara Falls, down the Falls Road, and then to Rochester and into the New York City area. And those were still operating, 1 train a day through there. But
Falls Road was never part of the RWNO, was it?
no, it was not. It was New York Central.
That's the part right along the lake. The RWNO is like the Hojack, basically.
Right, but I'm not sure.
The very first one.
So if you were to look in New York State between Rochester and Buffalo, you actually had the main line.
Yeah.
Then you had the West Shore, just about 5-10 miles north of that. Then the Falls Road, and then you had the Hojack. Yeah. So within a probably 30-mile slice of land, there were 4 east-west railroads. And the Hojack...
New York Central, and we're not counting the Lackawanna and the...
Right, the Erie, the Lackawanna and Lehigh Valley. We're right there as well, sure.
Lehigh Valley was a latecomer, 1892.
But the Hojack operated closer to the lake. That was kind of a branch line. That may have been, I know it was ex-RW&O on the east of Rochester. I don't know about west of Rochester. I think it was. Then there was the Falls Road, and then the what's the other line? The West Shore stayed in from Buffalo to Oakfield very late because there was a gypsum plant in Oakfield where they used to bring in gypsum, and they used to take out gypsum board and bring in raw materials to make gypsum board. So they're fairly active even into the 90s. But the Falls Road, so let me go to the next slide. Yeah, here's a picture of it. So this is Lockport to Brockport on the Falls Road. The Hojack, this is Route 104. The Hojack ran right along Route 104. And believe it or not, its biggest commodity was apples and applesauce. This whole area of Western New York is filled with apple orchards. In fact, Mott's had a huge facility in Holly, New York, and that was a lot of the traffic for that. And they would bring sugar to make applesauce. They would bring sugar, they'd bring out raw apples, and they would bring out applesauce, actually packed applesauce. So 104 was the Hojack. Falls Road here. The main line would have come through Batavia. Right here, it's marked CSXT. And then there was the West Shore, which came here to Oakfield from Buffalo. So there was a lot of railroading in that little swatch of land there. So there's the Falls Road, and it gives you a little better look at our Buffalo operations. These are the operations in Batavia, which are ex-Erie and ex-New York Central, and then back to the Depew, Lancaster, and Western. We have customers all along the line here. Right now, we have an ethanol plant in Medina, New York, just between Medina and Knowlesville, where we're bringing in corn. We haven't brought a lot of corn in lately because they've been using a lot of local material, but that was a real winner for the Falls Road. Also in Brockport, you may have seen it in the press, we're bringing Tropicana orange juice into Brockport. And we're running orange refrigerated boxcars from Tropicana in Florida, but in Bradenton, up to Brockport, where it goes into a refrigerated warehouse and gets distributed into Western New York and into Toronto and into Canada. We're actually seeing that traffic slow down because Canadians aren't buying U.S. products right now. And because of the whole tariff arguments, just like they're not buying American whiskey, U.S. whiskey, the orange juice business has slowed down because people aren't buying American orange juice. I don't know what other option they have, but they're not buying the orange juice the way they were. But it's still, the business is still good, but Tropicana, we're looking at 4 to 5 boxcars a day of orange juice coming into there.
Yeah, and that's relatively new business.
All new business, yeah. It was all new
I was
business.
wondering how they would route it up there from Florida.
Well, it's actually interesting right now because CSX has their Baltimore tunnel closed.
Ooh, that just happened.
Yeah. So they're rebuilding. They're raising the clearances in their tunnel under the city of Baltimore. So right now the routing it's crazy. It's like Florida, over to Cincinnati, Cleveland, and across. Before it was right up the spine to Selkirk to Buffalo and over. But because there's a lot of traffic being rerouted because of the Baltimore tunnel being closed down.
So it's not coming up behind a pair of GG1s?
No, and it's not coming up to in the old CSX. Remember the old CSX Unitrain, right? Yeah.
Well,
But
I'm thinking of stuff coming up like the way the ore trains used to move 70 years ago through central Pennsylvania, snaking here and there and everywhere.
Sure.
No more of that. That's gone.
But the symbol on the Falls Road for that train is OJ1 and OJ2. So also on the Falls Road, it's 46-mile railroad. Like I said, strong agrarian business base, a lot of corn, a lot of apples. We bring a lot of fertilizer in there. We also support the Medina Railroad Museum. They have a nice little operation in Medina, New York, and they have a beautiful HO layout. It's almost probably a quarter acre in the old freight house with all model, HO models, excuse me, they run passenger trains there in the summers and in the fall. They take care of all the ticket sales. They have their own cars. All we do is hook and go. So we bring our locomotives up on our crews, and we just hook on them, take them to Lockport or take them to Brockport, whichever way they want to go. And on that, yeah.
The museum will be part of the New York Central Society annual convention this June also.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, it's out there.
I would recommend it highly.
It's a Rochester convention, but there's a side
Okay.
trip to.
Yeah, I would recommend it very highly. It's a really great place. Out there, we use a couple RS-32s and a couple RS-11s. Though that 3604, well, actually, not in this picture. 1802 is an ex-nickel plate RS-11, and the 2035 is a New York Central RS-32. Yes. So.
Fleet of RS-32.
Yep. We actually have a Southern Pacific RS-32 as well. And then in Lockport, aptly named, you can see the lock underneath. The Falls Road goes over the Erie Canal, and that's one of our locomotives hauling their passenger train. And then you can see those like 40s, 46, 44 Bud coaches, ex-New York Central Bud coaches down there they use for their passenger trains. So we're coming to the end of the discussion of the railroads. A lot going on. So at the end of in late 2020, we were rebuilding our Batavia warehouse. We have this large 30,000 square foot warehouse, which is rail served, where we can bring in materials. We offload into trucks, so we can serve a lot of companies in that area that either don't have rail service or lost their rail service many years ago. Of course, we built the Von Storch shop, and we've expanded the capacity in our Utica engine house as well. So we have a lot of new room there to store locomotives. We've implemented a lot of real-time computer management along with the Class 1s to follow the cars' tags and know where cars are. We have this branded 3T truck train transload service, and we're doing this. We do also outside transloading as well, not just inside. We do a lot of, believe it or not, we haul a lot of fence posts for Western New York. It's a grape growing region, not for wine, but for grape juice. And Welch's has a lot of their grape. If you drink Welch's grape juice, you're probably drinking grape juice from west of Buffalo, between Buffalo and Erie. It's all in that portion of New York. So we bring a lot of wire and fence posts in for the grape vineyards there. But yeah, the business is good, and the founders of the railroad have been around for 35 years. We have a good management team in place. We've got some nice young people that are taking over some of the positions for us, allowing us to have a little more fun. And not that it wasn't fun to begin with, but so we have a great management team in place. And of course, the possibility of passenger trains coming to Scranton is on the horizon also. So we're very excited about the opportunity to work with Jersey Transit and Panera, which is the Pennsylvania Northeast Railroad Transportation Organization, to bring Amtrak trains to Scranton. And we continue to be on track. It's moving forward, and we hope to put about 40,000 ties on the east slope of the Lackawanna Main Line this summer to help support that if it does come. So a lot of track work going on. So, okay. So the question everybody wants to know, why Alco locomotives, right? Why do we run Alcos? It's very efficient, of course, and no matter what people tell you, 251 prime movers are still in use in many industrial applications. And because they have GE electricals, including rotating equipment, generators, traction motors, I mean, it's all very, very reliable equipment. And again, parts are easy to come by. There's thousands of Alco engines around the world, tugboats, and people still are using these things all over the place. In fact, this picture is an 18-cylinder Alco prime mover, 4,000 horsepower, that I took at, what's the nuclear plant down on the south shore that they're decommissioning? Pilgrim. So I got a phone call. The Pilgrim nuclear power plant had two 18-cylinder Alco engines and two 12-cylinder Alco engines. It turns out that for auxiliary power in nuclear plants, Alco, now Fairbanks Morse, is the only engine that can come up to speed and to torque levels fast enough for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
No kidding.
So every nuclear power plant in this country has got Alco backup prime movers as generators.
Do they generate a little smoke when they fire up?
Well, the thing is, they never fire up, right? So this is an
So it's standby.
yeah, the standby power
And pristine.
to run the like the coolant pumps and provide electricity to the plant should something happen. Like Fukushima, remember, like Fukushima, the tidal wave flooded the diesel backup engine. So when they took down the core, they didn't have a way to keep it cool because the tidal wave flooded the diesel engines that provided the power. That would never happen in the U.S. because they have air intakes and outtakes that are like 50 feet in the air to avoid that problem. But in case of a situation where they had to shut down the core, they would fire up the Alco prime mover to run all the auxiliaries at any nuclear power plant. And they had them up in the Berkshires there too, at the plant up by Hoosick Tunnel. What was it, Hoosick? Yeah. Row. Yep.
Row Yankee.
So I went down there, and I got a complete tour of the nuclear facility as they were decommissioning it, and saw these two beautiful 18-cylinder Alco engines, and the two 12-cylinders. We bought the two 12-cylinders. Right now, one of the 12-cylinders out of that power plant is on the floor of our shops, and it's going to go in the 405 this summer. So, so they're still out there, and of course these were, they were maintained to the highest standards. They ran, I think this engine had 100 hours on it, total. They would run it once a month to test it for an hour and shut it down. That was it. So,
Any word on who got the 16 cylinders?
on these,
The large one.
they're still there because
okay.
they couldn't get them out of the building without demolishing the building. So they're brought in, and there's no way to get them out until the building is gone. So they know we're interested in them. We really don't have a use for an 18-cylinder. That's 16 cylinders the most we use. But of course, the liners and the heads and the parts and all that, we could always use that kind of stuff.
Microsoft.
Well, that's
Microsoft is recommissioning
sure.
3 Mile Island.
Yeah. No, I know.
And the other question, you mentioned Fairbanks Morse. That sounded like Fairbanks Morse took over the remains of Alco.
They did. Yes.
So there still is.
They're still building new Alco prime movers.
Excuse me. I understand that you can buy brand new Alco prime movers that are manufactured in India under license from probably Fairbanks Morse.
Yep, I would think so. Yeah.
And after all, one of those 18 cylinders really ought to go up in that CP engine that had an 18-cylinder in it.
It's true.
Originally.
That's right. That's true. But so these are still everywhere in the country. You could go to Fairbanks Morse and buy a new, 12, 16, 18-cylinder 251E or 251F engine. And in fact, I think I was reading something somewhere that the Coast Guard just is commissioning 3 or 4 new icebreakers that are going to have Alco engines in them as auxiliary power engines. So they're out there. If you know where to get stuff, it's easy to find. This is a picture I took. So Alcos, we're running, we love them. Also, they're the other thing is they're very fuel efficient, right? Because they're 4-stroke, not like an EMD 2-stroke. They sip fuel. In fact, we leased an M420 to the Susquehanna for most of the summer last year, for summer and fall. And the one comment that the Susquehanna people made was that their fuel bills down in the New York area have never been lower because the engine was so efficient and used so little fuel. So they loved it. We're hoping to lease it to them again. This is the last part of the talk is, I call it Why Alco and some excellent adventures, like Mikey's big, great adventure. So some of the stuff that I've done, which is, being in the railroad business has afforded me, which has been a lot of fun. This is a photo taken in Prince George, British Columbia on the BC Rail. And I flew out to Vancouver. I talked to the BC Rail guys and I said, I'd really like to ride those Bud cars, you know, you have from North Van up to Prince George. Should I do it? They're like, what the hell do you want to do that for? It's like an 8-hour ride. You can get on a plane and be here in an hour. So I unfortunately took the plane up to Prince George. I didn't ride the Buds, and I regret that. I wish I would have ridden the Buds. It would have been a great ride. But when I got to Prince George, this is what was there. All the remaining operating C425s were all lined up, and they had shoved them on a side track for us to go through and to look at and to inspect. And we picked 4. We wanted all 6, couldn't afford it. We took 4. The other 2 went back into service, and we bought those later, and they were the ones that were stuck in the strike.
Excuse me, were they built by Alco or were they built by MLW?
So these, the 425s, were built for the Erie-Lackawanna in like 1965, right? And they were owned by a locomotive lessor,
Leasing company.
right? And so they never went to Conrail. On day 1 of Conrail, they were taken out of service. The leasing company wound up selling them to BC Rail, so they never made it to Conrail. But they're ex-Erie-Lackawanna, so they're actually running on their home rails. I mean, you know, they're back in the Scranton, PA area, running where they were in the 60s and 70s. So, but this is some of the other stuff we got a chance to be around when I was up in Prince George. This is obviously, you know, a couple of their big 6-axles they were using on their road freights. And funny story is when I was there, they had just received their new GE wide cab, you know, those, I forget what they're called, but the GE wide cabs. And I was with the shop foreman talking about getting data and getting all the books and the maintenance records on the locomotives we were going to buy. It's a beautiful day. We were outside. And all of a sudden, a hostler came out. And these 4 engines were parked there. Hostler walked out at like 3:58, and he just wiped the throttle on them. They'd been idling all day, and it just spewed smoke and soot coming out of the stack. Closed the throttle, walked out, and walked back in the shop. And I turned to the shop foreman. I said, what was that all about? He says, well, the GE service rep is a German guy named Franz, and everybody in the shop hates him. So at 4 o'clock every day, they go out and they cover his car with oil. Only on the railroad, right? So he has to go out and he has to clean his windshield off because there's spots of oil all over his car. Yeah. This was there as well. This is in Prince George. I'm sorry, this is in Squamish. The 812 was in Squamish, had a service. I went back to Vancouver, went up to Squamish later. This engine never came back into service. It had a bad main generator. This is another trip we did. There's a steel mill north of Montreal called Sidbeck Farini. And at the time, it was a Crown Corporation. It was owned by the Canadian government, like similar to the way the CN was a Crown Corporation. And the CN had, I'm going to say 50 or 70 RS-18s in Moncton. Some serviceable, some not. And we tried to buy a couple of them from them. And I talked to Canac, who was handling the transaction. They said, you guys weren't even close in price. And they all went to a place, this Sidbeck Farini. And my guess is that the Canadian government was kind of balancing value against their Crown corporations. So one Crown corporation sold all these locomotives to this other Crown corporation, and they scrapped them. But I talked to the manager of the steel mill, and I said, hey, if I come up there and I pay you American dollars cash, can we come up and take parts? And we went up there probably 4 or 5 times with a couple of our mechanics, myself, and a 10-ton truck, and just stripped all the electrical parts, all of the rotating parts, not like main generators, but fuel pump motors, crankcase exhauster motors, stripped everyone we could and brought them back to the States with us. This is
something getting it through customs.
Well, this was 92, so it wasn't so bad, but we did have trouble. This is one of our guys who was working for us with a torch, cutting air brake components off the 3103. And again, another interesting story was this same gentleman. He's since passed. His name was John Pizarek. He was cutting stuff out of one of the cabs, and he lit one of the cab roofs on fire with a cutting torch. And so I walked over, and there's flames coming out the window, like flames coming out the window. And he's pulling the masonite down, trying to keep it from like igniting other stuff above the masonite. And I went into the shack that they had there and grabbed the fire extinguisher. Of course, nobody spoke English. And I just grabbed the fire extinguisher the guys used for the cutting, the regular cutting guys. And I went up there and I stopped the fire and put it out and brought it back in. And I was telling the manager of the steel mill that night, I said, geez, I was in the crew shack in your crew quarters and nobody spoke English. I said, does anyone here at the steel mill, and this place is like about 40 miles north of Montreal on the south side of the St. Lawrence. His name was Serge Gertin. And I said, Serge, do any of your guys out there on the cutting floor, do they speak English? And he said, Mr. Thomas, he says, they do not speak English. And if they did, they would not speak English to you. So, yeah. So they weren't really happy about us up there taking the parts off, but that's the way it goes. The other thing that was very interesting when we were there was one time where there were trucks coming in on the scales, and it was all of the, we looked at the stuff that was on the scales. It was flat cars with trucks parked on the back of the highway truck, and they looked kind of weird. They looked just different. And it turns out, as we kind of looked a little closer, they were from the Newfoundland Railway. And it was all the rolling stock from Newfoundland. It was being trucked to this steel mill to be cut up. They had piles of like 36-inch gauge trucks and 42-inch gauge trucks and flat cars that were there. So kind of an interesting thing. Another good story, and I apologize for the stuff, the detritus on the slide. When we finally bought the 803, this is one of the other engines we purchased. We had a deal with CN to move them from British Columbia to the Conrail interchange for ridiculous money. The CN had a tariff for the Canadian railroads would move other railroads' locomotives for very inexpensively. And so I knew this engine was coming east, and my wife and I happened to be in Montreal. And we were at, not St. Luc, the CN Tashawa Yard. Tashawa? Yeah, in Montreal. And I wanted to see the engine because there was a note in the electrical cabinet. There was a manila envelope with my name on it with all of the electrical drawings and a lot of the maintenance records. So I I got past the guard. I explained to him, I'm moving a locomotive, it's here. And I walked into the shop, and it was a Saturday. The shop foreman looked at me like, are you crazy? You just didn't hear. And I had a Nikon camera around my neck too, so he thought I was kind of just a rail fan. I told him who I was, gave him a card, went in, and I opened the electrical locker, and there was the envelope with my name on it. So he finally realized that I wasn't pulling his leg just to get in there and take pictures. But this was a picture I took while I was sitting there in Tashawa on its way to us. Again, they were putting it in the shop. Another one was when we purchased the 4743. This was at St. Luc. There were two operating, there was an M630 and M636. We bought the 636, and the Minnesota Commercial bought the M630. And we looked at both locomotives. The wiring was the 4743 and the 4583, I think. the C630 or the M630 had terrible wiring. You could open the electrical cabinet and touch the wires and the insulation would just fall off. This engine had great wiring, but the wheels were thin. And for those of you who don't know, there's a requirement on the tread thickness on a locomotive wheel, driven by the FRA and by whoever else. And so this, but for us at the time, today it wouldn't be an issue, but at the time we bought this, changing wheels on a locomotive was a difficult endeavor. You had to lift it or have a drop table or jacks or that kind of thing. And so we cut a deal with the CP to buy the 4743. We traded them a 581 main generator off that 3603 that I showed you we bought for parts, because they were running all the 1800s. Remember the CP 1800s, and they were having a hard time getting 581 main generators when they would fail for those locomotives. So we traded them a 581 main generator, and they didn't put new wheels, but they put serviceable wheels under the locomotive at St. Luke for us. Put nice thick wheels on it for us, so we didn't have to worry about it.
Wiring?
I don't recall. It was I don't know. It was the low voltage wire. It wasn't the high voltage wiring. Where the aluminum wiring was a problem was on the high voltage, high current wiring side. But what we were looking at, it wasn't so much the big wires going to the traction motors. It was all the control wiring in the electrical cabinet that was falling apart. Delta Bulk Terminal. I own another business besides the railroad business, which is kind of a high-tech company. We make lasers for the military. And I would spend a lot of time out at Lawrence Livermore National Labs out in Livermore, California. And every time I would go to Lawrence Livermore, I'd take a ride over the mountain and go over to Stockton and pop in and talk to these guys at the Delta Bulk Terminal about that C636. I really didn't want to see, like one day read internet wasn't that prevalent then, but read in a Railfan magazine that Delta Bulk took it out of service and cut it up and it was gone. So they knew I was interested. In fact, I chalked on the other side, do not scrap, call 603-494-2059. Yeah, and we wanted that thing bad. And
Penn Central 636.
yes, that's correct.
Other existing ones.
That's correct. Yep.
6792.
Yep. And so like I said, I keep going back to Delta Bulk Terminal. I'd always talk to them. They were looking at the way we actually got it out of them was we bought a Union Pacific. Union Pacific had C30-7s everywhere. And I convinced the folks at North American Stevedore, who was the company that owned Delta Bulk Terminal, that they had just bought two C30-7s in LA for the Port of LA. And I convinced them that they needed to replace this engine in Stockton with another C30-7 because, it's the same as you have in LA, and it'll have the same parts, and you guys can work on it. It has all the stuff you need. And so we wound up buying a C30-7 from the UP. It was in service, and wound up trading it to Delta Bulk Terminal for that locomotive. So, and I think that U-boat is still, or that C30-7 is still there in Stockton. I haven't been back. I was in Livermore last week. I should have taken a ride over to see. But yeah, that's how we got that out. Then when we moved it, I came across the Santa Fe to Argentine, Kansas. Went from there up to Chicago, and when it got to Cicero, we found out that all the flanges were like pizza pie cutters, because just from being used in captive service for years. And the Santa Fe at the time was Santa Fe, not BNSF, wouldn't move it any further because of the high flanges, and we wound up having to buy new wheel sets for it, and the Indiana Harbor Belt changed the wheels at their yard, and Santa Fe paid to changing the wheels, because my argument was they accepted an interchange. So your inspector should have looked at it in California. But the thing came all the way across, the Arizona and New Mexican desert at 70 with no problems, and finally got flagged in Chicago. But we got it home. The thing was full of spiders, some kind of California spider, and but I think the first winter took care of most of that. And but now we use it. We run it every day, and it's a great locomotive. We love it. It's
What did
good.
Santa Fe charge for the cost to get it across the country?
It was about $3,200, I would say.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't bad at all. Today, to move a locomotive from Binghamton to Buffalo on NS is probably $8,000. So it's class $7,000 to $8,000. Yeah.
Reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not too bad.
Well, you
Not as
mentioned
bad as
Canadian
it is.
Pacific was going to charge a very high.
So CN actually, we moved those locomotives from North Vancouver to Montreal for about $1,200 a locomotive, because CP and CN had tariffs in place with sister railroads, and they had negotiated a very, very low rate because CN's moving some CP engines and CP's moving some CN engines. So if you charge me $100,000 to move my engine, I want to charge you $100,000 to move my engine. So they had a really, really low rate in place, and because we were a railroad, they were willing to honor that rate. So it cost us more to move it from Montreal to Carthage on Conrail than it did from Vancouver to Montreal. Yeah.
Professional courtesy.
So that brings us to this thing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we had decided. Well, Doyle, when the PA went to Spencer, I talked to Doyle, and we talked about not letting it ever go back west. But at the time, he wasn't ready to do that. And about 3 or 4 years later, he had decided that he was looking for a good home for the PA. That it wasn't going to get finished in his lifetime. He didn't have the bandwidth to do it. He had enough stuff going on. And there were a number of people that were interested in it. 3 to be exact. Ourselves, there was a Hollywood star / producer who wanted to paint at Santa Fe. And Doyle wound up selling it to us. And I happened to be out in Portland for another reason. Sat down with him, we had dinner, and we made the deal over dinner. I think he was his interest, the way I see it, was that he was looking for a good steward for the locomotive. And obviously, we have a number of historic engines in our fleet. We treat them very well. We have, besides our regular road power, we have an EMD or EMC SC switcher. There was one of the Lackawanna switchers built in 1934 with a Winton engine. We saved out of a coal mine in Pennsylvania. We have Lackawanna HH660 that came out of a steel mill in Gary, Indiana. We have a Lackawanna GP9. So these aren't part of our active roster, but they're part of our collection because myself and my other business partner, David Monteverdi, feel like we've been very lucky to be in this business and to be successful in this business. And we want to give back. We want to give back to the history of the railroads and to the rail fans out there. And it's an opportunity for us to kind of preserve some of the locomotives we loved growing up and when we were young as well. So after having a conversation similar to that with Doyle, we decided to make the deal and cut the deal for the 190, and now it's moved on its way to Scranton. So here it is in Portland. Union Pacific had to take it. They have a beautiful shop there with the 4449 in it, and that other SP, I think it's the SPNS 700. Yeah, 282, and they're both immaculate. I mean, beautiful steam locomotives, and beautiful shop. They just put a turntable in there, and so we pulled it off their property. We had to take it about 3 miles on the UP from their shop over to the BNSF yards in Vancouver, Washington, and this is the UP taking the engine out and bringing it over to interchange. We were told vehemently, do not ship it on the UP. So, and funny story on the BNSF, again, one of these great things. I was talking to the person who was the vice president of short line operations for BNSF, and we were on the phone. I said, look, we're a short line railroad in Pennsylvania. We're moving a locomotive from Portland that we just bought, and and it was the kind of usual conversation. Okay, so many miles, it's going to cost this much a mile. And the guy says, by the way, what are the marks on the engine? And I said, well, right now it's NKP 190, but it's going to move under DL 190 when we finally get it going. And the guy just said, pardon my French, he goes, you bought the PA? Just like that. And I said, yes. I said, we did, but as a matter of professional courtesy, please don't, we're arranging the move on BNSF. Please don't say anything because we're going to have a big announcement, and make a press release with trains, and that's the way Doyle wants to do it. So, so even, there are rail fans sprinkled among the ranks of the professional railroaders also. So,
Does that have a prime mover in it, and is it runnable?
Oh, it's running right now, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It needed a lot of work when we got it. Doyle had put a prime mover in it from a M420 off BC Rail that was hit by a log truck, and they were going to scrap it. He bought it and took all the components out of it. So it's basically right now, it's an M420 inside a PA. It's a 251, 12-cylinder 251E with...
What's the engine rated at, 2,000 or more?
2,000 horsepower. Yep.
2,000?
Yeah, it's 2,000. But it's got an alternator in it. It doesn't have a generator. It's an alternator.
Is that former D&H 19?
Yeah.
D&H 18.
18.
Yes. In fact, if you see a Porsche Cayenne in the parking lot with a New Hampshire plate, this is D&H 18. That's me. So,
So it's got the same prime mover generator package that MK put in it 40 years ago. V12.
I'd have to look at Chris McDermott's book. Yeah, it's got a 12-cylinder 251. I don't recall if they put a alternator or if they still had a generator in it. I have to look at Chris. Like I said, it's in Chris McDermott's book. I'm guessing they probably kept the 581 because all the electrical gear was probably set up for that. So.
Does that still have a steam generator in it? Or
Does not. No, doesn't. That was removed. So, in fact, when we were looking at the locomotive, we put new sandboxes in the back, and I was going through with our chief mechanic in Scranton, and I looked at him and I said, I've got a steam generator we're going to put in the back of this, and he almost fell off the running board. So no, they're not going to put a steam generator back in it. So does have a, like I said, 251 engine. It's basically an M420. It's got a alternator with diode packs in it for DC for the traction motors. This is coming east out of Portland. It went all the way from Portland to Argentine with a war bonnet BNSF engine on the front. And I can tell you off the record that there was BNSF people, the motive power people actually found the locomotive that was still in the Santa Fe war bonnet to run on that train and put it on with that. So, yeah. In fact, we were trying to get NS to, when it came out of Chicago, we were trying to get NS to find their nickel plate heritage unit and run it with a nickel plate heritage unit. But unfortunately, it had been in a minor derailment, and the front steps had been bent up. It was in the shop being repaired, so we couldn't do it. But yeah, there was rhyme, and the BNSF did a great job moving it east. We had a guy who was an ex-D&H road foreman and engineer drive east and follow it. And there was a spot in the middle of like Wyoming where they were 20 miles from the nearest road where the train was stopped to be recruited. He drove up there, and there were people, you can imagine Wyoming, it's kind of like it is the Wild West. And there were people out shooting guns and, hitting road signs all over the place. He said while it was stopped, he was standing with it, and a BNSF police officer came up and asked him who he was and why he was there. BNSF had put police officers when it was stationed in places, and they really did a nice job moving it east.
Wow,
So,
all right.
yeah.
How were the flanges?
Oh, the flanges were fine. Yeah. This is it coming into Scranton the first time. We went down to Taylor Yard and got it. I went to Conneaut the night before, and I saw it come through. I told Doyle I was going to take a picture of it coming through Conneaut. Doyle was born and raised in Conneaut, and got his hands wet with steam locomotives when the 759 was rebuilt in the Conneaut roundhouse. And so he's from that area. His father was a dispatcher, worked out of the Conneaut dispatcher's office. So I promised him I'd go to Conneaut and take a picture of it coming through. Unfortunately, it came through at night, but we still got some very nice pictures of it coming through town. And Buffalo the next day, left Buffalo late next afternoon to Binghamton down to Taylor, and this is us bringing it into Scranton. So, yeah, we're very excited. This is it on the Steamtown. When we got it, we didn't want a lot of people hanging around the shops to get a picture of it. It was a big thing, and so we took it over to Steamtown and let them display it. They were having a summer kind of little railroad gala, and we put it outside the shop. This way everybody could get a chance to see it, take a picture of it, look at it in a safe environment instead of having to traipse through a yard or into our shop area. But when we took it out of there about a month later, this was it on the turntable. And this is a picture of it next to the 759 at Steamtown. And that's Doyle and his wife, Lori. So the engine that Doyle started on, the 759 at Conneaut, in the late 60s, and the 190, his most recent project, were posed together, and I could tell you there was some teary eyes that day. So, but it was great. I'll cherish this picture forever.
Did you require any? Is there a requirement for maintaining the paint scheme?
No.
Nothing of the sort?
No, there's no, on the sales contract, Doyle made it very clear that if we bought the locomotive, we could paint it anyway. We could paint it, orange and green if we wanted. There was nothing on the locomotive. But I think out of respect for him,
While he's alive.
for his efforts to save the locomotive, we will keep it nickel plate for as long as he's with us. And perhaps once he's passed, he's 82 or 83, perhaps once he's passed, we might do something else with it. But I think as long as he's with us, we'll keep it out of respect for his efforts and respect for his work. So,
Very nice.
yeah.
And was that the only paint scheme in the nickel plate used for her?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
That was their Bluebird scheme. So, and it's funny. This was the D&H 18. I rode behind that locomotive numerous times, in high school, on fan trips out of Scranton or out of Oneonta when I was old enough to drive. I'd drive up. A couple buddies would drive to Scranton and ride the train. And I've got pictures of the 18 coming into Cherry Street in Scranton on a railroad that we operate now on the Delaware-Lackawanna. And and there's the D&H 18 on the point. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of. I wanted to kind of end with some of the blessings that being in the railroad business has offered me, and that let you know that I'm really humbled by a lot of the experiences, and I think about some of the things like going to Contra Corps and taking parts off Alcos and it's been a pretty good ride. So the PA it's ready to go. We will probably operate the locomotive this summer. In the fall, we'll start running some passenger trains. And I showed a couple people some pictures of the cab inside. It's been completely rebuilt. It is as FRA qualified as any locomotive that's out there. We could send that locomotive anywhere we wanted, and it would, pass inspection. And we'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens to it over the next couple of years. But we did a complete rebuild. Prime mover, compressor, traction motors. One of the issues we had was that those trucks, because they were Fairbanks Morse trucks, were made for Westinghouse motors, not for Alco motors, or for GE motors. And so we had to modify the trucks to hold a GE 752 E8. But the engine could pull a train on Norfolk Southern tomorrow, or once we're done with it, it's fully FRA compliant. The cab was rebuilt, electrical cabinet was rebuilt, and we're looking forward to operating it and running it this summer. So it should be a lot of fun. A couple other things that are interesting, probably interested to you in the B&M Society. We've also bought a B&M passenger car, ex-B&M passenger car. And we're going to be hopefully moving it to Bill Ricca to be rebuilt. We're working on that now with the MBTA. It was a B&M.
4-6 sleeper right back.
Yeah, no, it's like a parlor car, I believe. It was the Chickadee, one of the bird cars.
Oh, wow.
One of those.
Yeah, it was a steel with a fluted side. It's Chickadee.
This was
One of the
the
full
post-war
standard cars,
cars?
1947?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
McGinnis, yes.
Well, before him, 47.
Was the one that got
Built in
caught.
Worcester, Pullman Standard.
Yeah, right, yep, yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I guess B&M had a bunch of passenger cars that were birds, like,
Yeah, that's what they were.
Yeah. And this is the Chickadee. The fluting, the stainless steel fluting has gone off it, but we're going to be bringing it here. We're going to turn it back in. We're going to get it back up and running. We're going to be using it on this train. So, that's kind of good news for you people who have, bleed maroon and gold. And the other thing that I was allowed to tell you is I got a text from a little birdie at the MBTA that they're in the process of painting a commuter locomotive for the B&M in maroon and gold.
Wow.
And that and it'll be out this summer. So look forward to that as well. The MBTA is kind of, you've seen some of the other engines they've painted up, and trying to inject a little bit of history into the operation. And so they're going to be painting a locomotive in the B&M scheme this summer. It should be out in June or July. So
A little question related to this. Both the Santa Fe and the Delaware and Hudson, up over the top center of the windshield was a number board, electrically lit up number board. I noticed it's missing off there. What happened to it? It was there when it operated in Boston.
yes, Doyle took it off because it wasn't, nickel plate didn't have those on theirs. It actually, he saved it, and it went to the guys in Texas. So it's going to be used on the one that was rebuilt. It's being rebuilt down in Texas. So
Was another PA being rebuilt in Texas?
yes.
Wow, one of the four that came to Boston?
Yes.
Wow.
Number 16.
Yeah.
16, and this is 18, right?
Right. So I think it's at the Texas State Railroad Museum, perhaps. And it needed a lot more work than this engine did. It was basically a collapsed shell, and Doyle gave it to them. They're going to repaint it. They're rebuilding it in Santa Fe. In fact, I think they actually bought an FPA-4 or an FA, cut the nose off it, because the nose of the PA was so badly damaged. They're doing some sheet metal reconstruction and using the curved portion of the FA nose to rebuild, the same proportion. The PA nose has got the same curve, just longer. It's different proportioned differently. So
The other thing they did with that is they had to use that FA for the roof stringers.
Yeah.
The roof stringers, when the engine rolled,
Yeah,
were all
right.
smashed to pieces. So that's going to have an FA's gut center as well as a PA.
Yep, yep. So hopefully, I think it's a matter of their funding and the donations they can, the work will only go as fast as the money they can raise to do it. But yeah, there'll be another PA hopefully at some point
What they
running.
do with the one that went down to Mexico? They had two still down in Mexico.
They're still down in Mexico.
Still down there. Wasn't the one wrecked?
No, there are two that operate down in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
They're-
They run
yeah.
them all, or they stuffed it mounted.
No, they run. They run them. Yeah, they don't run them like on excursions or anything,
No.
but they start them and they'll operate. So, but I think they've been declared, Mexican national treasures, and
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we'll ever.
Came down to their wallets open, they figured
So
out
the
they
one
had-
the Texans got is the one that rolled over and
Right, Doyle got two when he bought the two out of Mexico, and he rebuilt the one that had the least amount of damage. Had the other one stored. That's this one. Then had the other one stored. It was on a flat car for years in Brooklyn Street Yard in Portland.
Wasn't that one supposed to go to the Smithsonian until Wadoon died, and then the new boys at the Smithsonian said that we don't care, get rid of it?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the details, but yeah, I think that was supposed to go. That may have been earmarked for the Smithsonian. So, but yeah, so that's it. And thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed it. So. Any other questions?
David J. Monteverde, how's he doing?
Great.
Oh, he's still alive.
Oh yeah. No, David's
I
he's
used to hear about him a lot years ago.
yeah. David's in his late 70s. Just had his knee replaced, so he's a little. He's been kind of homebound, but David's fine. Nothing. No big issues. I talk to him every day.
Yep.
So
Come to think of it, I was hearing a lot about him about like 35 years ago. And then, suddenly he's doing things in this railroad and that railroad and that.
yeah, yeah.
Last I heard, there was one or two surviving PBs out there. Is that anywhere on your radar screen?
There is. There's a PB. It was Rio Grande.
Yeah.
It's used as a power car, and it's actually up on the Algoma Central.
Right.
CN had it for sale, and it's always on our radar screen, but the problem is a set of trucks doesn't exist for it. So it's got a set of Blomberg trucks, and unless we could find a set of A1A like passenger trucks for it, it probably wouldn't be appropriate to run, with. And so CN had it for sale, pulled it off. It's just stored on the Algoma Central right now. It still exists, and
There
it's
must be a set of trucks for that somewhere out there.
there's not so Doyle had 3 sets.
Yeah.
One went to this engine, the other went to the guys in Texas, and the third one was on a G&W railroad in Oregon, and they wanted him off the property, and he wound up having to cut him up because he didn't think he really had a need for him, with the other 2 PAs. So he wound up letting them get cut up, and so there's no way to resurrect him at this point. Supposedly the trucks were so it got those Blomberg trucks very late in the Rio Grande, in the first, late in the life of the Rio Grande. And if you've ever been to Burnham Shops in Denver, there's a scrapyard right outside of Burnham Shops. And there was some, crazy rumor that the trucks were buried in a pile of scrap, that they hadn't melted them down yet. And in fact, I went there, and I was in Denver on business. It was in Boulder, and I went down to that scrapyard and tried to, look around, and they let me, but I had no luck. Yeah, no luck.
Would it be fair to say that you would not allow that PB to be cut up if it were to come to that?
I don't know.
I know it's not appropriate to run that with the Blomberg trucks under it. Right?
Yeah, I think.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Now,
And
PB is what is this like for, PA and this is a PB?
it's a B unit. Yeah, basically a B
Okay.
unit. Yeah, looks just like a PA with no cab. Yeah,
Yeah.
but somebody else owns it, it's not mine. So it depends on what they're asking for it, or what what they want to do with it. So I haven't, just like the sharks, whatever happened, the sharks have been sequestered for 30 years or 40 years.
Now,
So
I know Denver and Rio Grande had 2 of those. Is the other one still survive?
I don't know. I didn't know they had 2.
I figured if anybody would know, you would.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, if I could get an FPA or FPB4, with a B unit with an FPA4 behind it, I would do that. It'd be a lot easier to run and would help. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
So now regarding the malt house, the Genesee Brewing Malt House, I knew they had one at Sodas Point to like 1983, and then that they had closed it. They were the last brewery doing their own malting. And then I hear now that they got to your railroad and out of Buffalo for a while. The Cargill plant, the malt, they had Genesee Brewing had a malting facility now in Buffalo after
after ConAgra. Okay. But there was one at ConAgra, like I said, but I know that's closed. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Nothing on any of our railroads.
So it sounded like Genesee Brewing was having ConAgra do it for them.
Yes.
And that's why they closed Sodas Point. Okay.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah, that affected I can never remember which Ontario line it was, which is which, Central versus Midland.
Right.
Midland's on the Lehigh Valley, or was.
Yes.
And the Central then is the one that's
The old Hojack, yeah.
Yeah, I never got that Wallingford or something up to Sodas Point.
Yep.
I saw it, but I never rode it.
Gotcha.
A question related to the PAs again. How much did they weigh, and were the trucks A1A or CC trucks?
Trucks are A1A. Yeah.
And how much did the engines weigh?
Wow. I don't know.
I ran all 4 of them, and I never knew.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was working in commuter service in Boston.
Oh, okay. Okay. I honestly don't know.
Pardon?
318,000 pounds according to the MK Builders Plate.
Oh.
Really? I have. You know what? I've got a copy of Chris McDermott's book, which is the book of the how they were rebuilt. The whole rebuild process. I mean, everything right down to the motors, and I could probably find that in there. I'm sure the weight is in there. But I mean, it's an RS11 basically, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, I can tell you from running them, they were the Cadillac/Mercedes-Benz of locomotives.
Well, maybe someday we'll get them running out of South Station again.
I prefer North Station.
Well.
One other question related, you talked about all the upgrades and all that. Are they equipped with cab signal to run on any mainline railroad?
Not cab signals, no. It's too expensive.
Yeah, when they were in Boston, they ran to Providence frequently, but they were always a trailing unit behind another.
Because they didn't have cab signals. Yep.
They weren't allowed to run on the main line, but they did run trailing with either a GP9 or an E8 in front of them.
Okay. So all those Penske, E8s had cab signals, right? Or yeah.
Yep.
So,
The 190 had FM trucks under it at one time, didn't it?
What's that?
The 190 had FM trucks?
It still does. Yeah.
Still does.
So it's a very similar truck to the Alco design, but it's just cast differently. So.
And there's no other set of those FM trucks?
No, we've actually of the Alco trucks. No, there's no other set. Neither. There isn't a set of either. I actually talked to General Steel Castings about what it would cost to cast like 10 pair of PA trucks, just to have a few spares. And it was expensive, not like over the top expensive, but expensive. I would, we'd be looking. Oh yes, definitely 6 figures. Yeah.
Question, have you contacted the museum down there in Brazil where there is a PA too, and I think there's the trucks off a scrap PA too?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't. The cost to move something from Brazil probably is not within our strike zone, but and I've always wondered. There's a wide gauge, right?
5
Yeah.
gauge, I mean.
No, they're like 5-foot gauge. Yeah, they're wide gauge. So I don't know if the trucks, if there's a different casting for a wide gauge truck, or if the wheels are just set at a different gauge on the axles. And that's always a question I've wondered. I don't know what the answer to that is. If you look at those MRS ones that the Army had, they had, they were like a variable gauge or a dual gauge, but it was always smaller than standard gauge. So I don't know how they would do it with with a wide gauge truck, or if those trucks were cast specifically for the wide gauge application. You were going to ask.
I have a non-locomotive question. Has the Delaware-Lackawanna been able to get any freight business out of the Scranton Army ammunition plant?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, so we did at one point. Oh, well, so the Scranton Army ammunition plant, is that?
Former Lackawanna shops.
Oh, okay, so you're not talking about Toby Hanna Army Depot.
No.
You're talking about the General Dynamics.
The former Lackawanna shops.
Oh, yeah. We switch them every day. So that's owned by General Dynamics. They make shells for the Army, and we are both bringing in steel billets to make the shells and shipping out finished product, going to Crane, Indiana.
Without fuses, I hope.
Yeah, without. Well, it's just the shell casings. They pack everything at the ordnance place in Crane. So and that business, because of the war in Ukraine and the U.S. depletion of our armaments, has ramped up tremendously, going 24 hours a day, and we're moving a lot of steel billets in and a lot of shells out. So yeah.
When I attended the BMRRHS convention in Scranton 15 years ago, we were poking around the shops with our cameras, and some security guards shoot us away.
Oh yeah, sure.
So even back then, it was a sensitive military operation.
So you rode the NRHS train. Was that for the grand opening, or was that when the NRH had their convention, like in Lancaster,
Yeah.
and they came up and rode the train out of Cresco? Right?
Unfortunately, those tickets were sold out, so I didn't get the chance to ride on that.
Okay.
I rode on some other conventions.
Some of us needed a connection to
Yeah.
somebody.
Michael, on your email on the screen, is it really Thomas at TV Rail?
No, I actually I changed that on the original talk this morning, but because for some reason it wouldn't see the stick, I copied it off my laptop real quick, and that mistake was still left in there. So
Okay, so
yeah.
it is Michael.Thomas
at GVT Rail, yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, I caught that and changed it before the show. But then, believe me, I panicked. I was worried that I grabbed the wrong stick, and that I didn't have the presentation. So
Lewis, Lowville.
yes.
There was just an article in the news in the last week or two about Conway Scenic trying to get a hold of the mountain division in Maine. Is that just a normal course of business? Is there something in your industry that's spurring such developments nowadays?
So Conway Scenic is, but also the Vermont Railway has been very active in bringing back some of the underutilized rail lines in northern New Hampshire. They're opening up the line from. So Ed Jeffries retired and sold his operation, which was the old.
New Hampshire, Vermont, or something?
No, it was Eddie Clark's freight opera. Not Berlin Mills.
North Stratford.
North Stratford, yeah. So they bought that, and there's talk about opening up the line from St. Johnsbury to Gilman, where the old paper mill was in Gilman, and then also from North Conway to Gilman. I think that track is all still in. No, I think I think the railroads are just the small railroads are being very proactive. They're seeing there may be some opportunities for business, and starting those, starting some of those lines back up again. And we would certainly be interested. It's not kind of within our strike zone, so to speak, but there's a lot of work. Those lines need a lot of work, but hopefully they'll, it'll work out for the owners, or for the state. I think owns them, but they've taken over the operations, but from the state. So, yeah. Yeah.
You said New York State chased out the paper mills. Was that on environmental
Yeah,
grounds?
all environmental. Yep.
So all for cleanup of the sites and so on?
Not so much cleanup, but first of all, the paper business started to decline, and Newton Falls paper was we would bring in 10 cars a day of pulp and other paper making materials. They had a unique product. They made paper for like coffee table books, so really high quality coated stock that was expensive, and that you couldn't buy from Malaysia or from other places. So they were bought by a company in Wisconsin. It'll come to me. And they made a go of it for about 6 or 8 months, and then it was just too hard to, they wound up closing the plant down and demolishing the plant. It was bought by a Canadian paper manufacturer. The only paper mill that's still around there, Burroughs Paper is still there, and they make coffee filters. So how many people, most of us here probably still read a newspaper, right? But how many 30-year-olds or 25-year-olds read a newspaper on Sunday morning, right? So newsprint's down. How many people are reading magazines? A lot of it's online. But people are still drinking coffee. So as long as people are drinking coffee, they'll need to make coffee filters, right? So that paper mill will stay in business.
And they need to make, making craft paper or brown paper for Amazon.
Sure. We have
They've been up in Maine where I used to call on people, and the guy who couldn't make it, Mel, was calling on them selling chemicals. The high quality, filled paper, and that's gone away, and the machines are making brown paper.
And linerboard, linerboard, and yep. We have in Batavia we have a box plant where they bring in the linerboard, and they make boxes. It's a 40-car a month, 50-car a month customer. Yeah, it's big.
When I was in graduate school, the treasurer for the Newton Falls paper company was in one of my classes, and I just recently had tried using Google Earth to examine Carthage and Newton Falls, looking to see what's left of those facilities. All of those, the mines, the paper mills, and some of them are just flat.
Yeah. The paper mill was bought by a Canadian company that thought about resurrecting it, and they wound up just demolishing it. There's nothing there. We have some opportunities with Benson Mines. A lot of caprock up there, a lot of iron ore up there, and as the U.S.'s desire to onshore things is as it progresses, we'll see. We've had steel mill. There's still thousands and thousands of tons of iron ore up there, and really high quality ore. So we'll see if that. It's interesting. The owner of the mine, when it shut down in the 80s, he always said this mine is shut down like 5 times. Shut down in the teens, in the 20s, in the 40s, 70s. And I really think it's going to reopen again. So we would love. We actually had a deal with a large steel producer to start bringing iron ore out of there, and it was squashed by the governor in New York at the time, by Andrew Cuomo.
So he almost went to jail, so he's out.
Yeah.
I think it was his father.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you personally this has been a tremendous presentation, and you don't come across as a stuffed shirt president of some big railroad. You come across as a normal guy who
Well, thank you.
loves what he's doing and shares that passion with everyone. You've been a tremendous speaker.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm getting goosebumps here saying with you saying that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You know, it's funny. Actually, you may or may not know this, but the president of the Norfolk Southern, Jim Squires, is from Hollis. And he retired. He retired to Hollis. So he left. He was the CEO of Norfolk Southern, and he retired about 4 months before the wreck in Pennsylvania there. And I was in the Hollis Dunkin' Donuts, and his father was kind of one of the, he was a doctor, and he was kind of one of the town fathers in Hollis. Right? He was a moderator, he was selectman, and it was Doc Squires, Jim Squires. And I was in the Dunkin' Donuts getting a cup of coffee, and he came in, and I was like, Doc Squires, how you doing? You know, how are things? And he had a Norfolk Southern golf jacket on. And I said, what are you doing wearing a Norfolk Southern jacket? He says, oh, my son, he's the controller for Norfolk Southern down in Roanoke. I said, no kidding, what's his name? It was Jim Squires Jr. So I looked him up, and we talked, and he became president of Norfolk Southern, and he later became CEO of president CEO of Norfolk Southern. And if any of you are familiar with the New England Railroad Club, it's an organization, we probably know as, if working for the railroad, it's an organization of professional railroaders that meets 4 times a year down in Boston. We have a nice dinner, usually a speaker from I'm on the board of directors of the New England Railroad Club. Usually we have a speaker that comes in from a Class 1 railroad or MBTA or a G&W or somebody to give a talk, and or the FRA. And I was president of the New England Railroad Club at the time, and I got Jim to come and speak. And he brought all the Norfolk Southern people up on their private jet from Roanoke. And I sent a limo to his father's house in Hollis, and I brought him down to the Fairmont to have dinner with the rest of the Norfolk Southern people. He came down. He was getting up there in age, and it would have been a tough drive, especially going back at like 11 o'clock at night. But I brought him down to the dinner where his son addressed the New England Railroad Club. And he retired, like I said, Jim retired about 6 months before the big wreck there in western Pennsylvania. And he retired back to Hollis. He lives in Hollis. And I see him I have an old beater high rail truck that if you live in New Hampshire, we don't have trash pickup. You have to take your trash to the dump. And so I have an old beater F-250 with high rail gear on it that I like driving around town because people look at it and start to stare. And I was at the dump, and this guy's pointing at it with his sister and friends, and it was Jim. He says, damn it, Thomas. He goes, I knew if there was somebody else in the Hollis that would be driving a truck with rail gear, it'd be you. So, but he's a nice guy, really great guy. He's retired, and he's retired to Hollis. So I still see him at the dump about once every 4 or 6 weeks. Yeah.
Mike Swift lives in Gilmanton.
Yes. Mike lived in Hollis as well.
Oh, in Hollis.
He lives in Gilmanton now, but he lived in Hollis. He used to live on the other side of town, and I used to kid with him because Mike and I are good friends, long friends, 30-year friends, and his company was bidding on the Mohawk, Adirondack, and Northern when we were. So we were bidding against each other, and we also bid against each other on the Finger Lakes. But at the time, Conrail was trying to divide their short line railroads out amongst a lot of people, so a G&W didn't happen. They didn't want somebody so big that they could tell the Class 1s what to do. And so Mike and his group, even though it's partially owned by G&W, they won the Finger Lakes. But I used to kid with them. I used to drive from my laser company's office in Nashua to our house in Hollis. I used to drive right by his house. And I used to kid with him, and I'd say, hey, if you see that guy in the Jeep who's throwing your trash in the back of his truck, it's me going through trying to find your confidential price papers. So, no, Mike and I we're long friends. And so, did you know Mike?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
He's a member of the Rutland Railroad.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, great. We've had some great times. So, yeah. Yes?
He was at the Springfield
Take
show.
over these
Oh, yeah.
lines, branch lines and what have you, is it a smooth transition, or they have been abandoned for any length of time?
Well, it's usually a fairly smooth transition. But where we run into issues where we've run into issues is that most of the railroads that we've taken over, and they were all from Conrail, were the kind of the weak branches on the apple tree, right? And they're about ready to get pruned. Like, think about what the Hillsborough branch looked like before CSX. Right? Never that bad. But, the railroads were secondary and tertiary lines for the big class ones. And a lot of the times the crews would go out on them and get lost. And, they didn't work a full day if it wasn't 12 hours, where they had one car or 50 cars. So it's taken a long time to rebuild the physical plant, to get the railroad into safe and good shape, to get above that 10-mile-an-hour accepted track level. And fortunately, we've managed to hang on for 35 years, and most of our railroads now are Class 2 and Class 3, and even some Class 4. So, and a lot of that has been with the help of state and federal money to help rebuild these lines. But it's keeping trucks off the road and keeping industrial development happening in some towns that would be kind of forlorn if they didn't. The town I mentioned before, Medina, where the Medina Railroad Museum was. My wife's born and bred there, actually. It's weird. My wife actually lives in a town that we have one of our lines runs through, grew up there. And Fisher Price was a huge employer in Medina. And Fisher Price is from the Buffalo area. They had 4 or 5 plants out in western New York. And they sold out to Mattel, and all of that business, or all of that manufacturing, went to China. Fisher Price was owned by a family in the Buffalo area, and of course it was a big company, but they felt like they wanted to keep manufacturing in the U.S. They paid their guys a good wage. It was a good company to work for. And then when they sold, Mattel took over, and Mattel was a big multinational conglomerate, and they just took all the manufacturing in China. There were 1,200 cars of plastic pellets when we took over the Falls Road. 1,200 cars a year of plastic pellets going into Medina to make those Fisher Price table set, like the picnic table sets you've seen, like for kids. They were all made in Medina, and then they were shipped out by rail too. They went out in boxcars to warehouses, and that all went away. And so towns like that, they without the railroad. So 12 years ago, we landed and put an ethanol plant in Medina, $40 million ethanol plant with like 170 jobs. And so, without the railroad, that ethanol plant would never be there. So, we've managed to keep regions of New York and Pennsylvania viable for industrial development, and keep people employed and do that as well. So, it's been good that way.
A lot of people don't realize that without a good marketing team, you're lost.
Yeah, well, I mean, the big railroads, if we have not Agway anymore, but we have feed mills that used to be like an Agway that, maybe there are 250 cars a year of some kind of food coming in or grain. And the big railroads, if you're a customer and you're going to move 250 cars, they really don't have the time to market that business. Whereas we have guys that are out there, beating the bushes, and they're trying to take trucks off the highways and bring it to the railroad. And like, for example, one of our customers in Buffalo is a company called Whiting Door. And if you've ever driven behind a box truck, like, you've seen that little rectangular label on the back of the rolling door in the back of the truck. It says Whiting Door, Akron, New York. And Yeah, right. And Whiting Door makes those wood rolling doors for the back box trucks and for trailers and that kind of stuff. They were bringing in fur from the Pacific Northwest, and Conrail pulled out the railroad that served their plant. And so they had to truck all of that fur to their manufacturing plant. We set up an operation in Buffalo with them where we built a small rail-served warehouse. Only held 1 or 2 cars, but they started moving all their fur from the Pacific Northwest to Buffalo by rail, and then trucking it the last 5 miles from our railhead to their manufacturing plant. And so the cost savings to rail that from the Pacific Northwest to Buffalo is amazing compared to what it costs to move it by truck. So it made them more competitive, kept their business going, and we're making a buck doing it too. So that's the kind of stuff that the big class ones, they're not really interested in doing those kinds of things. So.
What the Finger Lakes has done with Mike Smith is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's 5x the number of car loads they had when they started.
Yep.
And it's really impressive to watch the operation.
Yeah, he's got a great team there. I know Bruce Haberfeld and, those guys are all...
Except the passenger cars were just sold.
I know.
They got out of that business now?
GMW.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, the passenger cars were all sold off this past.
They sold them to the Adirondack.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, some of them went to the Adirondack, yeah.
Yeah, I thought the Genesee and Wyoming was staying out of passenger business.
That's
I'm keeping track of lines that I want to ride on. I'm a mileage collector. And there was one branch of the Finger Lakes that Dave Brown and I looked at from Himrod down to Penyan. It looked in great shape, but they wouldn't run on us for us. But that's practically main line quality.
And it's probably 158-pound rail, too. It's an old Pensy line, so it's probably heavy rail.
And not like it was when it was Pennsylvania in the last year.
So, yes?
Other than the Chickadee, what passenger equipment do you have?
We don't have a lot, and we're trying to rectify that because we're going to need some passenger cars. We have the Chickadee. We have the Erie-Lackawanna number 2, which if I go right back to the beginning, let's see if this takes me to slide 1. Here.
You have a business car.
Yeah. So this is the business car here. This is it was the Erie President's car, and it's a beautiful car inside. It's all mahogany. It's got 2 bedrooms and a dining room and a kitchen, a full kitchen. It's not Amtrak compatible, but very close to being Amtrak compatible. And I think it was built in 1932 for the CNJ, and the Erie bought it in the late 30s. And it was used in Hoboken for many years. In later years, it was used as the superintendent's car out of Hoboken. And the car, if you look at pictures when the 759 ran out of Hoboken on the Erie-Lackawanna in the 70s, it was usually on those trains. So, but it's great. It's a beautiful business car. We're very lucky to get that. We have a nickel plate sleeper that came off of Chicago Northwestern. It's I'm trying to think of the name of the car, but it's a nickel plate car. It was used on the Bluebird with the Bluebirds, on the Bluebird, and so we have that. We have a couple Jersey Transit Comet coaches. Aren't the most beautiful things in the world, but we've put a maroon stripe on them to make them look kind of Erie-Lackawanna. We're looking at a couple passenger cars right now to purchase, and so we have a car called the Istanbul, which was a sleeper that came out of off the American Orient Express, but it was in the process of being rebuilt for for Ross Rowland's venture out of Washington up to, remember, he was trying to run a train out of Washington up to the Greenbrier, 8 or 10 years ago, and that CSX squashed it, and they wound up auctioning off the cars. So we have that car. We have an Army hospital car, and then we have one other. Lackawanna County has an XUP passenger car with it's an old piano bar car, so it has it's got like a depressed center to it, where the stairs go down to a lounge, and there's a piano in the lounge. There's an old piano car for the UP. That car unfortunately has a lot of structural issues. So, yeah.
The Medina Railroad Museum has some cars. Any possibility of using those?
Everything they have, they're using. They have a couple my business partner, David, they have a couple ex-Lackawanna cars that we would love to get. Unfortunately, one of them is just in dire shape, and it was recently burned by vandals. But the car side sills were gone. It was really, it would have been $1 million rebuild. They have another Lackawanna car that they use for their excursion trains, which we would love to get our hands on. But they are, to the benefit of them, they're doing very well, and they're making, they're filling their trains, so they don't have any spare cars.
So these you call them Lackawanna cars, they're like the post-war for the Phoebe Snow.
Yes,
as
yeah.
opposed to the old Lackawanna
Right, they're not those Lackawanna trailers, these are actually Lackawanna smooth side, Pullman's. I think they're Pullman car. Yeah. They were Phoebe Snow coaches, basically.
Thank you, I know them.
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned the MBTA and Billerica. What's the connection presently?
Just a place to do the work.
They're doing work in Billerica?
No, just a place for us to do work on the car. So I have been looking for a siding somewhere where we could move a couple passenger cars. Oh, the other car we have.
In the building.
No, it's not in the building. It's it's in Billerica where they have the milk car and the RDC. They have like a historical track in Billerica now. And so we're hopefully going to do some work there. The other car we have, which I forgot to mention, is we have a car called the American Mile Master, which was a blunt end Southern Pacific observation car, and it was the EMD ET100. It was their test car they used to run with locomotives when they would send locomotives out. And then Conrail turned it into a track test car, like a car that would go out and measure the elevation, rail wear, and all that kind of stuff. And that car is structurally in very, very good shape. We also have plans to bring that here to New England. And the reason I'm bringing them to New England is so I can oversee the rebuild on them. I have a couple friends that work for Amtrak, and I've done some truck rebuild work here, and so I want to kind of use some of the local talent to get those cars back running and get them back on the track. So, yes.
Would you be interested in acquiring an MP54?
Extension cord.
Probably not. Yeah. That's right up there with the Long Island ping pong cars. We had somebody offer us a Long Island ping pong car, and we weren't all that excited about it. So why? Where's their MP54?
I'm a member of the Trolley Museum. We have the Long Island MP54 we want to get rid of.
Really?
Oh, there's the one at Seashore.
Oh, it's Seashore.
Offer it to another railroad reservation.
I'll look on. Is it on your website?
It should be. Our museum director is looking for a home for it.
Okay. Well, I'll take a look on the website.
There's another one that's orphaned at the Connecticut Trolley Museum as well.
I know the guys on Long Island. In fact, that guy Rob Mangles, who I showed a picture of, is from Long Island, and he was involved in the rebuild of that Atlantic. I think it's an Atlantic that's down there. So there might be some interest there.
The T5.
What is it?
The 460, the
Yeah.
T5.
Yeah. So, anything else? Good? All right. Well, thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did.